Welcome back to Velshi and Rule on this very busy day. New developments today in the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Just moments ago, we reported that next week, House Democrats will depose acting U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor. And at this very moment on Capitol Hill, the former senior advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is giving his deposition to lawmakers. Michael McKinley, he is testifying today not under subpoena. He resigned from the State Department last week. Think about that. Joining me now on Capitol Hill, MSNBC's Garrett Haake and former federal prosecutor Cynthia Oxney. Garrett, first, what do we know about what McKinley might say regarding his time in the State Department? And give us a little bit more context around who this guy is, what his job was, and who he was working for.
Sure. I mean, McKinley spent 37 years at the State Department. He served as an ambassador in a number of different countries and was brought in by Mike Pompeo to essentially serve as Pompeo's conduit to the political staff and to others at the State Department until he resigned last Friday. Now, one of the things that House investigators, Democrats, want to get out of McKinley is the circumstances around the firing of Marie Yovanovitch. We do have some reporting to suggest that that was one of the last straws for McKinley at his time at the State Department. What does he know about how Pompeo handled that and how this ties into the, Giuliani outside advisor nexus of what was going on in Ukraine? He is a context witness for Democrats in that regard. And frankly, with the State Department operations more broadly, something that Democrats have been very interested in getting more information on since the moment we found out about this original phone call between the president and the president of Ukraine.
Cynthia, we know a number of people close to the president, whether it's Rudy Giuliani, the documents that the House is asking for from Mike Pence's office, Mick Mulvaney and others are refusing to comply. We just learned today Mark Esper is refusing to comply. Is this a different situation than we saw, let's say, in the Russia investigation or the request for the president's taxes, where those stonewalling tactics and running the clock worked because there was no other information getting out? Right now, you've got McKinley testifying. 3 other people have already testified, and there's more coming. If you're any of these people refusing to comply, isn't it a negative for you not to be able to tell your story and to allow others to do it for you?
Absolutely. And you're right. The stonewalling worked in the Russia investigation because they never broke through. But here, all the career people are coming through. This Bill Taylor is very important next week. Sondland's testimony is very important. It'll be interesting to see whether or not he brings the documents that have been subpoenaed. And we found out now from Fiona Hill that he was using his personal phone. So it'll be interesting to know whether or not we learn about the text messages that are on that phone and any other information that he has. Was he using WhatsApp? What was he doing to communicate? But yes, you're absolutely right. It's different from the Russia investigation because the stonewalling has been stopped. And the other thing in the Russia investigation is nobody ever pushed it. Don McGahn didn't testify, and the House Judiciary took him about 3 months to go to court and say it's an emergency, he needs to testify. And of course, the court's like, emergency? Where were you 3 months ago? It was such an emergency. This will probably be very different. When these people aren't testifying, Schiff will be in very soon in front of a court and pushing to get this information from the individuals who aren't showing up. And it will be an emergency situation because it'll be done quickly. And it is an impeachment investigation, which gives it gives the court added ammunition to force them to testify more quickly and turn over documents.
Cynthia, the Republicans or the White House has been trying to force Nancy Pelosi to have an official impeachment vote. Without that vote, they're saying this is not an official investigation. It's a big scam. They don't have to do it. Let's say Nancy Pelosi puts this to a vote. Let's say she gets it. Will they have any other viable excuse to not show up?
Of course they will. It's Lucy, not to date myself, but this is Lucy in the football. I mean, I'm tempted on some level to say, yes, just have it so that they don't have that excuse anymore. But let's face it, they are not going to cooperate. That letter from the White House, which was not the least bit lawyerly and had improper citations to law in it, when the White House said we are not cooperating in any way, shape, or form, that's their attitude. They are not going to turn it over. I have to say I have a great respect for the toughness that Nancy Pelosi has in this situation. I don't think they're ever going to do it. They're going to have to be forced by a court.
Garrett, what have we learned so far about White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney's role concerning Ukraine policy? His name keeps being bantered about, but has it been pinned to anything specific yet?
Well, he's the chief of staff or the acting chief of staff, so you would expect Mulvaney to have his hands at least a little bit on almost everything going on within the White House, and that appears to be the case here. We learned yesterday from one of the members who was in that deposition that there was a meeting that Mulvaney called back in May in which he essentially directed 3 political appointees to be in charge of Ukraine policy, forgetting what their actual jobs or responsibilities should be. Those 3 individuals, Rick Perry, Kurt Volker, who we have already heard from, and Gordon Sondland, a name we're all going to be very familiar with, I suspect, when this whole thing is said and done. He's expected to be here tomorrow, and we'll have to talk a little bit more about this. But Mulvaney is increasingly coming into focus as a presence for all of this. And he's someone who I think will likely go to great lengths to be protected by the White House should he ever be called to testify or provide any kind of documents. But his presence in all of this can't be overstated at this point.
And let's not forget, there was a surprise visitor today back on the Hill, Kurt Volker, for a second time in less than a week.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.